Welcome back. The chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith, says he'll make how the Defense Department spends its money the focus of his committee's oversight, in addition to what the department buys. It's the latest effort to connect budget and policy in the acquisition process. Bill Greenwalt is visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Industrial Policy. He's writing about the subject on the AEI website under the title Competing in Time. Bill, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. You and Dan Patt of the Hudson Institute are looking at any number of takeaways and recommendations for what to do to speed the acquisition process. What are some of the most important things that you looked at?
Yes, well, we looked at the how acquisition reform has fared in the last 5 years. In a sense, there was so much reform to try to bring a time-based focus into the acquisition process. And the reality is that has not been successful. And the reason has been that the department continues to be focused on its linear predictive processes, starting with the requirements process, the budget process, the contracting process, and the acquisition process. All of this takes time. And frankly, when you add it all up, it takes something like 7 years to really initiate a program, about 10 to 15 years just to get anything significantly different from what we have today. And something really disruptive might be 20, 25 years. We just don't have the time to do that when we're facing China right now.
You get at the issue right off the bat here, it strikes me. The keystone, you write, of the Defense Department's institutional architecture is not acquisition, but rather the budgeting process. A lot of stuff, as you just mentioned, has been done to try to address the acquisition process. Nothing has been done to try to address the budgeting process. Is that the crux of the problem, Bill?
That really is. The budget drives everything else. And it takes about 3+ years to start to get to line in the budget for anything. And then it requires requirements to start that process. Then it takes 2 years to contract. The budget needs to be more flexible and agile if we're to drive some of the new acquisition changes we have, like middle tier acquisition or other transactions, which can reduce the acquisition time, can reduce the contracting time, but without the budget time, as we've seen, these programs and capabilities are just not making it out to the field as fast as they should.
Yeah, the branches, I think, and the Defense Department as a whole have boasted, and I think rightfully so, about the moves that they've made to try to cut that curve. The problem, as you say, is they can't get the money any differently than they got it for any other kind of acquisition. What changes that, Bill?
I think there has to be first just the recognition we have a problem. This is a 60-year-old process that was brought in from the auto industry, best practices in the 1950s. Well, we know what it did to the auto industry, but for whatever reason, we haven't modified that process for the Department of Defense. We've modified acquisition, we've modified requirements, we've modified contract, but we stuck to this predictive program budgeting planning process for 6 decades, and it's not working.
All right, you and Dan write this: Congress and DOD should cooperate to promptly launch a limited scope pilot project on an alternative resource allocation process. Do you have an idea of what that should look like and what that pilot process should actually pilot, or is it just, or are you just suggesting that it's something that needs to happen?
Well, we understand how long it took to try to reform the acquisition process, and frankly, we're there. We have the ability to go fast in acquisition we want to, but we realize it's going to take a long time, and that we need to probably look at a commission to look at the full budget process. So in the meantime, we should be looking at mission budgeting and basically taking a mission, probably in Indo-PACOM, and providing more flexibility and funding for there. We've looked at portfolio funding. We've looked at the ability to fund as if you were a venture capitalist using Defense Production Act funding. A lot of different ways we could test and pilot new ways, but at the same time, you have to look at a more systemic review of the process.
And another recommendation that you make to that effect is holistic changes to the planning, programming, budget, and execution, PPBE. What should that look like, Bill?
Well, I think first we have to divide the world up into what it is we want to do. Some things probably PPBE can work for. In other words, they're predictive. We are going to continue to buy these or have these type of functions for the next 30, 40, 50 years. But when it comes to innovation, we need to start looking like Silicon Valley. We need to start being able to fund like Silicon Valley. And the ironic thing is Silicon Valley came out of DoD back in the 60s and adopted the best practices of what the 1950s defense process looked like. That was agile budgeting. That was being able to move fast and quick and start programs and stop programs and fund multiple pathways to innovation.
The third recommendation that you and Dan make is the policy and research community should conduct comparative analyses of the bureaucratic research allocation processes between the U.S. and China. And you note something earlier in this work that maybe is different than what I expected. You write, China may have an edge in this resource allocation process, although this topic merits further investigation. I had the impression that if Xi Jinping says we're going to do something, we're going to do something in China. Is that not necessarily the case?
It's almost very similar to when Eisenhower wanted to do something in the 50s and it happened. Yeah, no, it looks as though the Chinese are moving faster. It looks as though that's the case, but the data is really not available in the public to make those conclusions definitively. It looks that way, but we think that the department needs to spend more time making comparisons and figuring out why it is that we have the legacy Soviet process and the Chinese have the Silicon Valley process. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's something that we really need to have our best analysts focusing on.
Bill Greenwalt, thanks very much as always.
Thank you.